Before we get started, a quick heads up. Presidents Unplugged now has merch. If you want to support the show and represent the podcast in your daily life, you can at presidentsunpluggedmerch.com. That is presidentsunpluggedmerch.com. Now, let's get into today's episode. In 1814, James Madison and Dolly Madison heard some terrible news. The British had marched into Washington, D.C., at the time brand new capital of the United States, and they were out for blood. They had set fire to the Capitol building, and somehow they kind of knew that the executive mansion would be next. James Madison and Dolly Madison fled the White House, and through the ashes, they survived. What led to this event in history, and why is that just over 5 foot tall, 100-pound man and his wife running from the White House important at all? Let's do this. James Madison's road to the White House was shaped long before he ever stepped into the Oval Office. Because few Americans entered office with as much experience as he did. Although Madison himself did not sign the Declaration of Independence, he actually entered national politics after it was already completed and signed. He became important when it mattered most, the drafting of the Constitution. As the youngest member of the Constitutional Convention, Madison brought clarity and structure to a nation still trying to understand itself. At the time, the United States was governed by the Articles of Confederation, a system that succeeded in preserving state independence, but failed to create unity, strength, or consistency. Sure, North Carolina has its independence, New York has its independence, New Jersey has its independence, but the United States are not the United States at all. They're states divided. They might be independent on their own, but they don't work together to fight the greater cause. The Articles of Confederation left the federal government weak, unable to tax, regulate the trade, or enforce the laws, which led to constant debates and confusion about what are we supposed to do. Madison recognized that a nation could not survive in a constant state of disagreement. Oh my goodness, look at the freedoms we have in New Jersey. What kind of freedoms do they have in Vermont? These are strange things that we can't even really think about today, because we realize we have federal laws. We have laws that apply to all the states the same. Back then, they had no such thing. Madison just realized that we can't disagree forever, so he helped design a constitution that clearly defined the powers of the legislative, executive, and judicial branches. And just as importantly as the branches of government, Madison believed that the Constitution had to be amendable, allowing change. Through amendments, the Constitution doesn't have to say the same things forever. As we grow and change as a nation, we're probably going to have to change our laws. Because at this time in the United States, if you wanted to change your laws, you needed an entirely new system. And James Madison's forward thinking allowed the United States to not have to change their law book every 30 years like they'd been doing. But it does make sense that when the people didn't really understand this new amendable concept, they didn't really want to change from the Articles of Confederation. So to try to pump up the nation for this possible new way of government, James Madison joined Alexander Hamilton and John Jay in writing the Federalist Papers, a series of essays explaining why the Constitution was necessary and how it would protect our liberties while creating stability and hope for the future. That foresight was tested during James Madison's presidency in the War of 1812. The question is, why did the War of 1812 start? Why were we mad at Britain again? Well, here's the issue. Britain had the greatest navy in the world. They still have one of the greatest navies in the world because they're entirely surrounded by water. But that made Britain think that they could just control the seas. British sailors would bully American sailors, tell them how to trade, and tell them what to do. They acted like they owned the ocean. We were sick of it. And there was a certain sense among younger Americans, Americans that didn't really live through the Revolutionary War, who were just done with Britain. Leaders like Henry Clay believed that the older generation was too cautious. Who's going to let these old guys? I mean, the Revolutionary War was like 30 years ago. Come on now. It's not the good old days. We need to fight Britain. We need to prove our dominance. So we as a country were ready to fight with our very small number of men. Yeah, the United States was not really ready to fight, and that was 100% proven when the British soldiers marched into Washington, D.C., our capital, instituted by Thomas Jefferson, the third president. Madison was the fourth. And they marched into D.C., and they started burning all our biggest buildings. Yeah, that's honestly pretty scary. If people were just kind of burning buildings in D.C., that would not be a good thing. Madison and Dolly, as I said in the beginning, they ran through the ashes and escaped the city. But here's the issue. Why was Britain doing this? Why were Americans so mad about this trade stuff? Can't we just make our own products? Why are we even fighting? This is so dumb. We're literally independent nations. Why would we keep fighting each other? All these issues are what the Treaty of Ghent attempted to solve. While George Washington himself might not have had an Instagram page, Presidents Unplugged does. If you want to see some presidential content and overall updates on the show, come to the Instagram at presidents_unplugged. See you there. The question becomes, what in the world is a Ghent? A Ghent, G-H-E-N-T, was a place in Belgium where the United States sent John Quincy Adams, the son of our second president, John Adams, and eventually our sixth president later down the line, to decipher with the British about what to do about this war. Why are we in war? Well, John Quincy Adams was not going to give up too easy. The British walked into this Treaty of Ghent situation with a couple of demands. We need you to stop fishing in New England. It makes y'all too much profit. We need some territory for ourselves if this war is over. And, give me your third son. Obviously, the last one isn't true. But they gave these extremely random, almost all detrimental to the United States, requests. So John Quincy Adams just said, how about no? He declined. But he didn't just decline. He declined and made a great point. He said, Britain, let's say it straight. If we give all these side demands and these random negotiations of land and all these things, we can't fish and all this, that would only extend the conflict we're already in and might even cause another war. Instead, he pushed for an antebellum agreement. Now, antebellum is not your mom's sister. Antebellum is a state in Latin that means before the war. Antebellum is often talked about in the Civil War, but it's a term outside of that as well. John Quincy Adams's request was, let's just act like we did before this conflict even started. We weren't going at each other's necks, preventing the other person from fishing, acting like we owned the sea, and getting on each other for all this dumb stuff. Let's just act like we were before the war. Stop fighting. Drop all these lingering resentments you have for each other, and move forward independently. This lesson proved crucial for America's future, as the war revealed a danger that the United States was in at the time. They relied way too heavily on foreign nations for trade and economic stability. After the War of 1812 was over, the United States leaned into an absolute beautiful thing we like to call capitalism, where we're not just getting all our products from, some random French guy. We can get our products by United States manufacturers. How does that happen? By people in the United States stepping up, building factories, and making products for us to use. The money gets kind of thrown around. We buy our own products. We don't have to ship everything from Britain. Everyone wins. And that same process can happen in Britain, in France, and other countries too. It's just a self-reliance, so you don't have to base everything in your world off of some factory in Beijing, China. After we figured out the beauties of capitalism, they would empower individuals to create wealth, and really, they strengthened our nation as a whole. Think about the Gilded Age, the Factory Age, the Roaring 20s, all of those times where the United States was, let's just say, succeeding economically, were created by capitalism. But after the Treaty of Ghent was signed in December of 1814, John Quincy Adams could not call Andrew Jackson on his new iPhone 17 Pro Max and tell him that, yo, the war's over, you can stop fighting now. News traveled very slowly at the time, and 2 weeks after the treaty was signed, Andrew Jackson, our future 7th president, fought in the Battle of New Orleans without really knowing that the war had already ended. But now, as the great rapper Eminem once said, we need a little controversy, but it feels so empty without me. That person is Elbridge Gerry. Elbridge Gerry, who was James Madison's second vice president, his first vice president, George Clinton, was absolutely awesome. A wonderful vice president. He just so happened to die, though. And we had to replace him, so we had Elbridge Gerry for Madison's second term. Elbridge Gerry was a bit of a fraudster. Gerry thought it made sense that if you could redistrict certain areas of states, you could benefit your party when it comes to voting season. So, Elbridge Gerry used a little tactic of, instead of making the districts, the voting districts, look normal, he would make them all, as my grandma says, wiggy-wiggy, and they looked very strange. But these districts were not made in those weird shapes for no reason. Those weird shapes were made because they benefited the Democratic Republicans when it came to voting season. With these strange-looking districts, bigger cities would be split up or put in one area, allowing more districts to vote for a certain person or less districts to vote for a certain person. These weird-looking districts, they almost looked like lizards, maybe a salamander. Jerry salamander. That eventually became known as a gerrymander, which later became known as gerrymandering. Gerrymandering is wrong. Gerrymandering is cheating. Don't let anyone tell you that gerrymandering is okay, because it's not. This one thing destroyed Elmer's Jerry's entire career. He made this decision, which later caused retaliation from another person to do the same thing. This becomes an issue when people keep doing it in retaliation and we don't even know who started it in the first place. James Madison's legacy is actually pretty simple. Madison was one of the most forward-thinking individuals in that Constitutional Convention. Sometimes we can think of all those rich white landowners as flawless men who had insane forward-thinking skills and were inspired by change and liberty. They weren't French, I promise. Little do we remember that they didn't really ever want to give rights to their slaves or their wives. Thank goodness James Madison gave us a constitution that can be changed, which has allowed our nation not to stagnate its beliefs. We're not stuck in 1776. We're in the now. James Madison's thought process, even though in the moment he really didn't know what that thought process would lead to, James Madison had an open mind for change. James Madison's open mind allowed figures in the future like Frederick Douglass, an African-American man, to walk up to the president and say, "This is wrong. Change needs to happen." Which then led to the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments to the Constitution. Madison deserves to be called the father of the Constitution. He didn't just want to write a dusty rule book that people have to follow for eternity. He didn't really know what the future had to offer, and neither do I today. That's the thing. Madison realized that instituting a book that can never be changed doesn't help anybody. One that can be altered in small ways over the course of history to allow for steady improvement and overall success is the way to do it. And that is why James Madison is so important. Tune in next Friday as we honor Martin Luther King Jr. Day with a special episode exploring the life and legacy of the greatest civil rights leader in American history, a man whose impact reached far beyond Montgomery, Alabama, and reshaped the moral consensus of our nation. How could someone with such courage, compassion, and influence be assassinated? And how does his legacy continue to shape our world today? Learn about that and much more next week on Presidents Unplugged. I'm Ty Svensson, and I'll see you soon. God bless. We need to make an executive decision now. The executive decision to follow Presidents Unplugged on Apple Podcasts or Spotify today to be notified weekly that your favorite presidential podcast has released new content. Now, let's get back to the show.